The doomsday clock, a potent symbol of scientific concerns about humanity's possible annihilation, was advanced by 30 seconds on Thursday to 2 minutes to midnight, the bulletin of the atomic scientists announced in Washington. The last time the clock was moved so close to midnight was in 1953, during the Cold War. Now, in the Cambridge Council, we approve about 80% of policy orders. We generally agree on 80%, and the rest are more difficult. The policy I'm going to read to you wasn't even a discussion. It was a given that this made sense. This was on March 22nd, 2016. Whereas nations across the globe still maintain over 15,000 nuclear weapons, some of which are hundreds of times more powerful than those that obliterated Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and detonation of even a small fraction of these weapons could create a decade-long nuclear winter that could destroy most of the Earth's population. And whereas the United States has plans to invest roughly $1 trillion over the coming decades to upgrade its nuclear arsenal, which many experts believe actually increases the risk of nuclear proliferation, nuclear terrorism, and accidental nuclear war. And whereas, and I'm not reading the whole policy, by the way, in a period where federal funds are desperately needed in communities like Cambridge in order to build affordable housing, improve public transit, and develop sustainable energy sources, our tax dollars are being diverted to and wasted on nuclear weapon upgrades that would actually make us less safe. Whereas investing in companies producing nuclear weapons implicitly supports this misdirection of our tax dollars. And whereas socially responsible mutual funds and other investment vehicles are available that accurately match the current asset mix of the City of Cambridge, of the Cambridge Retirement Fund, while excluding nuclear weapons. So there are other vehicles for us to invest in. It's $1 billion fund, by the way, retirement fund in Cambridge. Now therefore be it ordered that the City Council go on record opposing investing funds from the Cambridge retirement system and any entities that are involved in or support the production or upgrading of nuclear weapon systems. And be it further that the city manager be and hereby is requested to work with the board of the Cambridge retirement system and other appropriate city staff to ensure divestment from all companies involved in the production of nuclear weapons or systems and in entities investing in such companies. And the city manager is requested to report back to the city council about the implementation of said divestment in a timely manner. Makes sense? Supported unanimously? Who could be against that? Well, the state law does not allow us to do that. And Mike Connolly, Representative Mike Connolly, will talk about a bill he's put forward. We were shocked to learn that there are state laws that basically say you cannot limit where you put public funds. And we said, tobacco, South African apartheid. And it turns out you needed special laws to initiate those programs, which had a great result in the long run. And I'll be honest with you, the council was beside itself. We can get revved up, but this one was like, what? You have to be kidding us. And hopefully with your support, that indeed can happen.
I have the really great privilege of talking about an amazing event, in fact, an amazing procedure, and what I see also as an important tool. This year it's the ban, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which was adopted on July 7th, 2017, by 122 countries, the vote of 122 countries, UN member countries. For the first time, nuclear weapons have been explicitly condemned and declared illegal because of their medical, environmental, and humanitarian consequences. The process that produced the treaty was driven by a coalition of countries, international organizations, and civic society groups determined to shift the debate about nuclear disarmament away from the strategic security interests of the nuclear-armed and nuclear-dependent countries, and to focus instead on the catastrophic medical, environmental, and humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons themselves, regardless of who possesses them. Why was this effort needed, this effort to create a treaty that would ban nuclear weapons? For years, because the countries that have nuclear weapons and those non-nuclear countries had a treaty, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which has in it a clause, Article 6, which says that the nuclear countries will divest of their nuclear weapons if the non-nuclear countries do not try and get them, resist the temptation to become nuclear armed. The nuclear countries have completely ignored this. They have found ways to circuit it. They have lied, cheated, and changed the subject for years. And finally, a group of primarily, I think, medical and healthcare, but others, a group of people within the UN system got together and started thinking of ways that they could organize. It's an amazing thing that over 10 years, basically in 2007, ICANN was formed, and that was the organization of 100 countries and 400 organizations from around the world. And they got together and figured out that they needed to demonstrate the important scientific and medical reasons why, and environmental reasons why nuclear weapons were unacceptable. Finally, in 2017, they were capable of bringing this to a vote where 122 countries voted in favor of it, and 50 of them have signed it, and now the ratification process is on, and it will make a great difference to what happens to have the United States, people here in this country, working on the ban from the bottom up. So that is what that is our agenda, to get to work in one way or another. I see the opening. I see this as a great tool.
We all know that the care and feeding of the military-industrial complex, if not the main driving force of our militarized international foreign policy, is got to be right up there, right? Just looking after the self-interest of these militarized corporations that have a very significant portion of their activities involved in military production. That alone is a driving engine that is putting us in great peril. Generally speaking, I'm an optimist that we can see the cup half full and do what we can. But nonetheless, I'm going to choose to present some of the bad negative stuff, the kind of stuff that for some people it paralyzes them and results in inaction. But I'm trying to just emphasize how important it is that we take up and engage more in this struggle. And I think that the technical aspect of the new nuclear weapons modernization program, if you really get into the nuts and bolts a little bit, it really says it all about why this is so horrifying. Now, you just heard, we're engaged in this thing. It's $35 billion a year to upgrade the nuclear weapons, and $350 billion over 10 years, $1 trillion over 30 years, so on and so forth. This program was implemented in the Obama administration. It's well underway. All of the major contracts have been let for intermediate and in some cases advanced design of these new weapons and their delivery systems. Raytheon is heavily involved. Our own Raytheon, Draper Labs is involved in guidance and control systems and so on. We're knee deep in it around here. Now, in fact, we're not even waiting for the new generation of nuclear weapons to be built. We're reconfiguring existing weapons to kind of fill the same function. So we have the B-112 bomb, a gravity bomb, right? It's accurate in most of its uses to a few hundred yards of a target. But now it's being now they're putting Boeing JDAM tail kits on it that make it accurate to 43 feet. And if you have an infrared seeker on it, it's accurate to 3 feet. You just need one of these bombs with a nuclear warhead on it and a JDAM tail kit, and we're already, they're already being configured right now to be used on the F-35s. So if you have these nuclear weapons that are super accurate with these dialable warhead yields, think what you can do, You can, it makes it so attractive to use them, right? And if you look at technical material for when they set this whole program in motion, it's not just because we have a crazy Trump who now is talking about using nuclear weapons in conventional battlefield scenes as a change in nuclear policy. Well, I guess you could call it a change. But if you look back at the design of these weapons and some of the documents involved in developing them, they say it right there. We're designing weapons to be used in offensive tactical battlefield situations or in first strike situations. So it's not just a crazy Trump, it's the full weight of the military-industrial complex. And what's frightening is that these are weapons. The new generation of nuclear weapons are weapons that are being designed to be used. So we have quite a task ahead of us.
Violence for us in our world, and us specifically as a country and as a people, has really been a part and continues to be a part of our history. It infects our homes, it infects our cities, and it infects our national policies. So whether it's through the use of fists or guns or nuclear weapons, both as individuals and as a nation, the use of violence and weapons is fundamentally unhealthy, immoral, and a destabilizing path that has oftentimes been chosen as a way to find solutions to complex as well as simple problems. So that's the challenge that's before us when we think about nuclear weapons. It's a part of who we are to respond in violence. So from a faith perspective, and really simply from an ethical perspective, when you think about how we deal with that reality, we have to remember that creation, if you think of it from a biblical sense, is always seen as good. In Genesis, creation is called good. So any weapon that can destroy creation with such a force, like a nuclear weapon, is by its nature an abomination of moral and ethical thought. Morality or ethics implies a standard of honest and honorable dealings. And I can't think of something more than nuclear weapons that can be used for dishonoring creation itself, with the vast amount of money being spent, and not, to be straightforward, not just nuclear weapons, but the vast amount of money that's being spent simply on the militarization of our country, as well as the vast amount of money that's being spent on nuclear weapons, keeps us from effectively protecting the vulnerable amongst us from hunger and from homelessness and from poverty. And certainly Martin Luther King, over 50 years ago, certainly toward the end of his life, began to recognize and speak more in the last years of life about this connection between war and poverty. The spending on war and a war economy or a militarization economy. So we're called, as King knew, and again, whether you're a faithful person or just an ethical or a humanist, we're called to do good to the least of those among us. Yet we spend and continue to spend billions and trillions of dollars on nuclear weapons, which by their very existence deny justice to the poor, and even in our own country. So important to understand that peace and justice are an inseparable pair. In our United Methodist Church, of which I'm a part, we have an affirmation of faith that is called the Methodist Social Principles, and within that affirmation of faith are these words, and they're words that are important to us and important to all faithful people. We confess our sin, individual and collective, by silence or action, through the violation of human dignity based on race, class, age, sex, nation, or faith, through the exploitation of people because of greed and indifference, through the misuse of power in personal, communal, national, and institutional, international life, through the search for security by the military and economic forces that threaten human existence, through the abuse of technology which endangers the earth and all life upon it. And therefore we commit ourselves individually and as a community to seek abundant life for all humanity, to struggle for peace with justice and freedom, to risk ourselves in faith, hope, and love. That's our calling, no matter who we are, no matter where we come from.
You know, in moving forward with campaigns to require pension funds to divest from companies involved in the manufacture of nuclear weapons, it's useful to know the prior history of such divestment campaigns in Massachusetts. In fact, there's been about half a dozen. I'm going to review three. South Africa, 1982, Northern Ireland, 1983, and tobacco industry, 1997. Now, South Africa, you remember during the 1970s, South African mobilization to throw off the oppressive apartheid regime intensified. In Massachusetts, support groups pushed the University of Massachusetts and Hampshire College to divest from their portfolios companies that did business with the apartheid regime. In the state legislature, Mel King, who was then a state representative, and State Senator Jack Bachman introduced the divestment bill in 1979. In the following year, a broad coalition formed, trade unions, church congregations, community groups, and also including the Catholic Archdiocese of Boston, which was very important, in support of the divestment campaign. Massachusetts had of the order of $100 million of a total of $2 billion in stocks that would be affected. So 5% of the state portfolio. It was not trivial. The bill passed the legislature in 1982, but it was vetoed by Governor Ed King. However, because of the strength of the coalition, the legislature overrode the governor's veto, and Massachusetts became the first state to divest from South Africa. That set in motion similar efforts in other states, and across the country, other states started passing divestment legislation, and then it culminated in 1986 with the federal government applying sanctions. So it's very useful, successful campaign. Took 4 years from the first clear articulation of it to actually getting through the legislature. It's not going to be quick. Some people in this room may remember that the Polaroid workers, actually it was Carolyn Hunter, longtime dean of Cambridge Ring and Latin, but she had been a chemist at Polaroid, they discovered that Polaroid was manufacturing the IDs used by the apartheid government to control the population. And they started a Polaroid workers' campaign for divestment that was very important in seeding this statewide effort. Now, the early 1980s was also the time of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Many of you remember intense struggles between Catholics and Protestants. Northern Ireland Catholics were excluded from government jobs and the best industrial jobs, such as shipbuilding, and a national coalition, which was led by industrial trade unions in the U.S., formed calling for divestment from companies doing business with the Northern Ireland government. The bill filed in Massachusetts called for the state pension fund to divest from industry supplying military hardware to the Northern Ireland government, and it passed. It was signed by Governor Dukakis, 1983. Weren't that many companies, didn't have that big impact on the pension fund, so it wasn't as much of an economic issue. But the tobacco case, which I think is the key lesson, I think is the model that we should take. You all know that probably the major social battle in the United States that was focused against the corporate product was around cigarette manufacture. Right? Already by the 1970s, it was absolutely clear that tobacco smoking was an explicit cause of lung cancer, so untreatable at that time, millions of Americans suffering from lung cancer and dying. Tobacco industry fought it tooth and nail, but by 1990, campus groups had successfully pressed Harvard University and City University of New York to divest their endowments from tobacco stocks. And Governor Dukakis called for the Mass legislature to pass such legislation. Now, it took 7 years, but finally in 1997, the bill passed. At that time, Massachusetts had about $200 million in tobacco stocks, but the portfolio was much bigger, 20 billion, so it was about 1% of the portfolio. In the subsequent years, 7 other states passed tobacco divestment bills. So that was very important model. Now, in the next panel, Mike Connolly, is state representative from East Cambridge and East Somerville, is going to describe initiating such a legislative initiative for divestment from companies manufacturing nuclear weapons. He might even lift the same language that the tobacco bill used. And that passage of that in the legislature would allow the Cambridge divestment order to go through, and any other town and civic entity in Massachusetts to divest from nuclear weapons. So everybody here in the audience is invited to be a founding member of our statewide coalition that we will form at the end of this meeting. We don't have a press release, but and we're going to go after, see if we can get this passed in the state legislature. You know, I'm sure it'll take many years, but there's no reason. You know, if we can divest from companies that manufacture cigarettes, kill people individually, we should be able to divest from companies who manufacture weapons that obliterate and kill every living thing within miles of the bomb center. We actually think that the international ban treaty now gives us the moral high ground. The nations of the world that these things should be, it's not only that they're not good, right, they really should be illegal, like the chemical and biological weapons convention. Some of you may think, oh, there should be more people here in the room. Let me tell you, I was around for some of the early meetings, both the early meetings of the tobacco divestment campaign and the early meetings of the South Africa campaign. And there were many few people in the room, but they had the right idea, right? They were politically active. They got together. We got plenty enough people to launch a statewide campaign. Thanks.
We already, right now, we spend about $20 billion every year on maintaining the nuclear arsenal, nuclear safety, and all of these things that go along with being a country that has nuclear weapons. To put that in context, the budget deal that Congress just struck to keep the government open for another couple of weeks at the end of the shutdown last weekend, part of it, what it did was reauthorize the CHIP program, which is the Children's Health Insurance Program. And there are children around the country who rely on this program as their only source of health insurance. And the budget for the Children's Health Insurance Program last year was only about $15 billion. So for the cost of what we're spending on nuclear weapons, we could fully fund the Children's Health Insurance Program every year. Or, you know, since we already have a Children's Health Insurance Program, we could double it, right? We could do any number of other things. So the fact that we're maintaining this nuclear arsenal, it's not just about the dangers of what if we actually used these weapons, but it's also about just having them, just keeping them around is costing us in terms of what else we can do as a society. Then there's this proposal for upgrading the nuclear arsenal, nuclear modernization. And this is a proposal that was green-lighted by the Obama administration and is now continued into the Trump administration. The price tag on this proposal seems to keep climbing, which is not shocking, is how these things go. It's about $1 trillion, and then by some estimates up to $1.2 or $1.4 trillion over the next 30 years. That is approaching the figure of how much we've spent on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan over the last 15 years, or more than 15 years, which is about $1.8 billion. So we'd be spending as much on just keeping these weapons around as we've spent on these horrible wars that we've been in, even if we didn't use them. And it would also be enough, speaking of the, you know, sort of this divestment campaign and the fossil fuel divestment campaign, that amount of money would be enough to convert every home in the United States to solar power 4 times. So there are many, many other ways that we could use our public resources and use our tax dollars. And in addition to being a very bad idea in terms of our national security and staying alive, it's also a bad idea because it's just a terrible use of resources. And I also want to say that, you know, on the whole, the Pentagon budget, I do that pie chart that shows that the Pentagon budget is about 53% of every discretionary dollar that the United States spends. It's about to go up even higher if this administration and the people in charge of Congress get their way. And more than half of that budget goes to private contractors.
So I'm basically here just to tell you guys a little bit about divestment, some of the tools that FLI has available for you guys to use, and a little bit about what we're trying to do here. So it's just a brief intro. You know, in terms of divestment, we're trying to obviously disinvest our financial holdings from companies which are either invested in nuclear weapons producing companies or which are nuclear weapons producing companies themselves. So these include companies which are involved in nuclear weapons, like launching processes and the weapons themselves. So companies that help with like the radar and the boosters and the rockets and the warheads themselves and all of this. So we want to divest from all of these companies which are part of this this nuclear weapons war machine. And so that's really the end goal and the objective. And so anyone with a pension fund or anyone with investments in mutual funds or any sorts of stocks can do this. You can check to see whether or not you have holdings in nuclear weapons producing companies or in institutions invested in nuclear weapons producing companies. And as we sit here in our sort of social context of MAPPA, I think that it's very important to reflect on the importance of this being contextualized and couched within a social context and interpersonal movement. So the way that I think that we really view a individual-based divestment campaign and an institutional-based divestment campaign succeeding is within the context of MAPPA or some sort of coalition between different Massachusetts organizations. And so I think this is like an excellent forum for discussing this and trying to create a group to move forward with pushing for divestment on the local and personal level, but also at the state level, in the city level, and in terms of institutions. In doing so and pushing forward with divestment at these different levels, as Jonathan has mentioned, we're trying to sort of create a model here in Massachusetts where the sort of text and language which we draft and are able to adopt, and the way by which we go about divestment offers a model for other states who are interested in pursuing the same thing. If you help get a university to divest, or you help to get individual persons to divest, then you're building up knowledge, you're building up procedural knowledge of how to get things done. You learn about like what are the most efficacious like means of divesting, where people have issues. And so, you know, together as we sort of keep going through this process, we help to like optimize for divesting in ways that are efficient and effective, and help to streamline like divesting, because divesting is difficult and it's confusing, and a lot of people don't really know what to do or where to start. So what we've done at FLI is we've created a lot of tools to help you divest. So right now it's not finished, but we're working on sort of aggregating all of the different technical tools and information about divestment economics, about how to divest, how to get a city to divest, how to divest personally, how to get an institution to divest. And so we're trying to package this all, and we're going to have it on our website soon, and we'll send a link out to that to the MAPPA emailing list once it's done. But it's going to include tools like I'm sure some of you are familiar with, like our divestment tool. So if you go to like futureoflife.org/invest, what you can do is you can go on there and you can search up any mutual fund, and you can see whether or not you or an institution with which you're interested in or involved with has holdings in landmine producing companies, cluster munitions companies, or nuclear weapons producing companies. It will tell you the specific holdings, it will tell you the exposure, it will tell you which are indirect investments, which are direct investments. And so using that, you can really know if you're invested in nuclear weapons, or know if your institution is invested in nuclear weapons. And so it's a really effective way of like starting a conversation about like going up to your institution and being like, hey, I know there are like publicly available records about your investments, and I looked some of them up, and I'm concerned because there are nuclear weapons holdings. Like, is there anything we can do about that? So we have tools like that, and we have guides about how to help cities to divest, procedures. We have draft language from the Cambridge resolution that was read earlier that can help for you know, creating the language and documents needed for moving forward with divestment. The action item today, and what we'd like to do today, is to really create a group here of people who are very interested and dedicated in pursuing divestment at different levels. So you can consider whether or not you would like to pursue divestment at an individual level. Are you interested in divesting yourself? Are you interested in getting other members of the community to divest and making a working group around that? Or you can also be part of, say, a second group where you are working to, say, help pass this this document through the legislature that will help to enable Cambridge to divest. You can work with the city. You can work in terms of hospitals or larger institutions. Here, I also think it's worth thinking about the advantages and disadvantages regarding whether or not we want to work on individual divestment versus institutional divestment. So I think that that's also something that you need to consider yourself and think about, like what you would be more passionate about, what you think you would be better at working with, and what you think would in general be a more effective solution.
So my name is Sarah Eckel-Dalrymple. I'm the organizer for Code Pink, and we're working on a national divestment campaign based on some of the work, like Don't Bank on the Bomb. But what we're working on is expanding that conversation to include all weapons manufacturers and military contractors who make a profit off of war. I'm sure, as we all know, divestment campaign is here to shine a light on what is making a profit. And we're making a profit off of activity that most of us would consider immoral. So we want to expand that conversation, and we want to talk about how we are making a profit off of things like cluster ammunitions, nuclear weapons, but also drones and warheads and the planes, and really talking about how militarization is permeating our society, and how that is not only just permeating our society in terms of culture, as we've discussed earlier, but also how it's so ingrained in things like our investments and our pension funds. CoPink, has been thinking about this in terms of an anti-war movement. You talk about the realities of war to people. You talk about how it's impacting certain communities. Right now, we're all having discussions about what's going on in Yemen and famines and starvation, and people feel really disheartened and not empowered. And you have a Congress and a White House that are Teflon, and they don't care, and they're not national defense and patriotism. How do we empower people to take action? How do we empower them to move forward? And that's what we're working on. We have a coalition over 70 organizations, and we're getting started the week. We're really kicking off and launching the week of February 5th through 11th. And speaking to the fossil fuel divestment campaign as well, this is expanding a conversation that we've started about South Africa and tobacco and fossil fuels, and that is, what is socially responsible investing? And if you are an institution that has adopted socially responsible investing, we want you to think about what that term really includes, and we want you to include a weapons screen. If you aren't an institution that has adopted a socially responsible investment policy, we want to partner with our other friends who are working on those same campaigns, because we believe it is an entire conversation. It is about investing, it is putting solar panels on homes 4 times over, versus contaminating all the water sources in Iraq, for example, or contaminating the water sources in our backyard from things like explosions and or munitions, when we're getting rid of our munitions. We were just talking the other day about the fact that, U.S. military doesn't have to have emissions controls on there, when they're getting rid of their excess. And so they're exempt from that. Not only are we poisoning people around the world, we're poisoning people in our backyard. And that's what we want to talk about. That's what we want to bring to the forefront. And we want to expand the conversation beyond just the peace movement. We want to talk about how pervasive war and militarism is in our lives. If you care about the environment, you care about war, because it is impacting your community from that lens. If you care about violence against women, then you care about war, because war is one of the, violence against women is a tool of war that is employed all over the globe. If you care about global refugee crisis and what we're doing about that, then you care about war. The U.S. is conservatively responsible for the displacement of about 10 million people since Iraq and Afghanistan, since about 2001. War is impacting our lives on multiple different levels, and that's the conversation we need to have, and that's the conversation that we want to talk about. And divestment is a tool that we can use to not only empower people to take action and empower our communities and empower our institutions to move forward, but also take that conversation to a new level and bring those people in and have those talks. Sometimes, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, and I know that you're all on board, but we need to move beyond the choir, and we need to have another conversation. And that's what we're working to do.
This idea that some of our politicians or our politics, what was the word you used? Teflon, right? Like it just doesn't stick. And if you'll indulge me, I'd like to maybe start with a quick story that really shaped my perspective on politics, on the Democratic Party, and in particular, what we're up against when we think about how to, roll back and walk away from this militarism that has dominated so much of our history. And so I want to take you back to the year 2006. If you recall, Republicans controlled Congress at that point, and the Iraq War had, started to really drag on. It had been going on for a few years. And really one of the dominant issues in that 2006 congressional campaign was, can we put strings on the budget? Can we start to bring the troops home from Iraq? And, in that climate where the Iraq War had started to get very old, Democrats succeeded, and they won, Congress. It was a big change, and we came into 2007. And, and this was, quite a moment for me personally. It really shaped my politics watching this. Because now the Democrats are controlling Congress, and the big debate is, okay, will we put some strings on the budget, the military budget? Will we put some conditions on that military budget? And the debate was raging. It was on the front pages of the papers, it was on the talk shows, it was on the news. And in the midst of all this, both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were launching their presidential campaigns while they were serving in the United States Senate. And so, especially Barack Obama, someone who I had had a lot of hope for up until this point, I had hoped that, he would step up in this moment and say, absolutely, let's put some conditions on the military budget. And I was hoping Hillary would do the same. I was naive. It turns out they were both very silent. And the debate escalated, and it finally came to the moment of truth. It was the day of the military budget vote that spring in 2007. Some people were on one side, some people were on the other side. And there was no opinion, no comment, no indication where Hillary or where Barack would go. And so then they had the vote. And, I forget the precise details, but it was, if I remembered correctly, maybe 70 votes in the United States Senate, no strings attached, just full military budget, give the Pentagon everything they're asking for, no strings attached. And then, and again, I'm sort of working off of a 10-year-old memory here, maybe there were 20 votes or something on the other side, the real progressives who were saying, yeah, let's have some modest conditions on this Pentagon budget. And you have 15 minutes to vote on a standard Senate vote. Still no word from our leaders, Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton, even with the vote, tilting in the other way. Finally, they give our senators some courtesy. Even when the clock hits 0, they hold the vote open for an extended period of time. So finally, with everything determined, everything set, it's clear this military budget's going to go ahead just like every other budget, notwithstanding what's happening in Iraq. With the outcome determined, triumphantly strolling into the chamber comes Barack Obama, triumphantly comes, Hillary Clinton, and, they vote no. We're opposed to this military budget. We want to put strings on it. And, I found that a little offensive, right? I mean, we're talking about war and peace, and we're talking about two individuals who are asking to lead our country, and we have a debate raging, and you have complete silence. And then you get sort of a very politically expedient vote, after the thing's in doubt. But that wasn't the thing the reason why I'm telling you the story. After that no vote, Barack Obama and some of his campaign apparatus launched a big fundraising campaign under the banner Courage. The courage that he had to cast that vote against the military budget with no strings attached when he was silent the entire time. And I only point this to say, obviously I would much prefer Barack Obama to be our president today rather than Donald Trump. But I think it shows you how much we're up against, that, on the Democratic Party side of things, that's the best we can muster, which I would say is no courage at all. And, that was a moment for me personally where my illusions were disabused, and I knew exactly what we were dealing with, which was a continuation of the militarism, a continuation of the neoliberalism, a continuation of these policies that have led to so much destruction. I was really ready when the Occupy movement happened. I was sort of primed, I was ready. I certainly didn't have a great deal of faith in the Democratic Party. So when Occupy happened, I was ready, I was there on day one, and it really changed my life in a lot of ways. And what I'm getting at is, I think in Occupy, we put a name to that first, evil, the materialism. It was about the inequality. It was about the corruption. It was about the wealth differences in our society. And so why I'm here and why I'll continue to stand with all of us and try to give voice to these issues is I think when it comes to the militarism, we still need that moment where we galvanize more than just who are here in the room today, but really try to broadly mobilize and galvanize people around the fact that we have to put an end to this militarism. I mean, it is purely insane that we have people in Hawaii getting text messages telling them that Armageddon is 30 minutes away. And it's scary to think what will happen when either a mistake or an aggressive act is made. Certainly, one thing that we've been discussing is wanting to reach out to Mel King, who worked on the South African divestment, wanting to reach out to Mike Dukakis, who worked on the tobacco divestment, and work to bring them into the State House and really elevate this issue so that we hopefully can move beyond the politics that we've become used to, which is a Democratic Party that is supposed to stand up for everything progressive, but has been all too complacent and all too comfortable with just accepting this perpetual war that we've been, subjected to. So that's why I'm here. I draw a lot of inspiration and a lot of encouragement from all of you who are here with us, and consider me a partner and a friend in this effort going forward.
So we have to organize. It's not enough to act individually. We have to act collectively. We have to reach hundreds of thousands and millions of people. And how are we going to do that? First, we're going to target companies. Raytheon is Massachusetts' largest military contractor. They are involved in nuclear weapons. They're also involved in almost everything else that the war machine is doing that is wrong. They're involved in the war in Yemen. They are building the long-range standoff missile, which is one of the new nuclear things that are being built. We could very well call our campaign "Stop the Massachusetts Nuclear Threat." I'll propose that until we think of a better slogan, because it's made here. We have to understand that the problem is here. Draper Labs is only a few blocks from here. They've designed the guidance system for the Trident II nuclear missile. So just on a piece of good news, the Norwegian Wealth Fund recently divested 2 weeks ago from BAE, the UK's largest weapons manufacturer, based on its production of nuclear weapons. That's the kind of results we're looking for. Second, we have to target institutions. We can target individuals, and Lucas has tools that helps the individual balance their own portfolio and take them away from weapons producers. I also want to highlight Stephen Dre is sitting in the audience over here. He works with Zevin Asset Management, and they're a socially responsible investment company that's our partner in this campaign, and they can advise people how to get out of weapon stocks as well as fossil fuel stocks and other harmful investments. But we have to go beyond individuals and target, for example, universities, pension funds, cities and towns, organizations of faith, congregations, and all the, in other words, anywhere you have a group of people together that have some kind of moral basis, that have some kind of coherence, then you can target those and you can build a campaign and call for divestment. We do have a decision to make, whether we focus on nuclear weapons companies or whether we focus on weapons companies. We have a military-industrial complex in this country. The nuclear weapons is part of it. It's a big part of it, but it's the military-industrial complex makes a lot of other stuff too, and that's what Sarah was getting into. And also, we also have to tackle how much do we partner with other movements? How much do we partner with the fossil fuel divestment movement, which is a few steps ahead of us in building popular support and in developing its strategy? How much do we partner with the BDS movement, which is trying to divest from companies involved in Israel's occupation of Palestine? Our opponents on that one took the trouble of filing an anti-BDS bill in the state legislature and in the federal Congress to outlaw speech in favor of, well, it's more complicated than that, but to penalize organizations that would engage in boycott of Israel, basically. We've been fighting that bill with Mike's help and that of other legislators. We need to sort out the legal issues. There's at least 4 lawyers that I know of in the room. Maybe some more of you are lawyers that I didn't know were lawyers. We need to sort out these legal questions and figure out exactly what it will take to pass a bill that would make it possible for Cambridge to follow through on its plan to divest its pension fund. Right now, Cambridge is blocked by state law. How do we sort that out? How come Bill de Blasio, Liz King asked in the break a very reasonable question. How come Bill de Blasio could announce that he was not only divesting New York's pension funds from fossil fuels, but he was going to sue the fossil fuel companies for causing Sandy? So how come he can do that and Cambridge can't do that? So we have to figure that out, and we need a legal strategy. So we need our lawyers to put their heads together and dig into this and figure out our legislative strategy. And also we have to, in order to build popular support, even though nuclear weapons can destroy human civilization, it's not the most immediate problem on most people's minds. They're concerned with their health care and their housing and their kids' education and their job. So we have to figure out how to connect that nuclear weapons issue with those immediate issues. So we are advancing 5 slogans in that direction. MAPA's nuclear disarmament campaign. Invest in mines, not missiles, by saying no to a new nuclear arms race. Fund healthcare, not warfare, by saying no to the trillion taxpayer dollars nuclear weapons escalation. Build subways, not submarines, by saying no to new nuclear missile submarines. Build homes, not bombs, by saying no to the $1 trillion nuclear weapon upgrades. And fund solar energy, not nuclear winter, by increasing federal investments in science and technology for sustainability. So we're harping on the money, going back to Lindsay's point, and that made by others, that the tremendous waste of social resources on these weapons is starving all of the things our people need. And we have to point that out and build those coalitions to get more political support behind our campaign. Join our nuclear disarmament working group. As I mentioned, this is our brochure. We need committees in different towns. We have a strong working group, and a number of members of it are here today, but we also need to have more committees in more parts of the state, more towns working together on this. We need a state coalition. When you came in today, you signed a campaign sign-up. So we're going to invite you to the meeting when we convene the state coalition for a planning process. So again, it's time to organize, it's time to move, and it's time to take on this complex.
So it's true, the federal budget, the total federal budget, the pie chart that we showed that has 53% of spending as military is the discretionary budget. That's $1 trillion. That is the pot of money that Congress has to decide every year and has to had this shut down over, and that's where Congress really has a lot of discretion. That's why it's called discretionary, in how they're going to spend that money. The total federal budget is $4 trillion, and that includes Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Those are the big pieces that are not discretionary, that are a big part of the federal budget, quite a lot of dollars. They are mostly not funded by your income tax dollars, so that's one big difference. Those are funded by payroll dollars. So you get Social Security, you spend your entire life paying into Social Security and before you get benefits. So that's one big difference, and that's something I think that is important that a lot of people don't understand. Most people don't understand. But it's kind of, Social Security and Medicare, but we pay into those before we get them back. So they're different, right, from the discretionary spending, the military spending. The other thing is the military budget. The military is the most trusted, apparently, institution in the United States, but not for good reason. There was a report from the Washington Post that uncovered an actual Pentagon report that found $125 billion in waste. That's $25 billion a year just in bureaucratic waste. That's before you even get to, I don't know, should we be spending $10 billion on the F-35? Should we be spending $20 billion on nuclear weapons? Should we be spending, the $1.8 trillion that we've spent on wars, and it jumps up to over $5 billion if you account for things like taking care of our veterans and paying the interest on the debt? Has that made us safer? I think a lot of people from various parts of the ideological political spectrum kind of recognize, oh, right, the Iraq War has not necessarily made us any safer. And sort of reminding people, it's not just rah-rah military. Here is what the money's actually being spent on, and kind of bringing it back down to that level of like, okay, this is what this money is really helpful.
I just wanted to build on Lindsay's point about our priorities for spending and what we're using that spending. And she mentioned it earlier that, over half of the Pentagon's, of the money that we give the Pentagon goes to military contractors. And, kind of thinking about that in terms of the fact that their stock values have tripled in value over the past 5 years. Why are we subsidizing them multiple times? We're giving them money from our income taxes, we're giving them money from our pension funds. This is why, these divest campaigns are important, because it's us as a community, and it's, as we talked about, expanding the conversation, but it's taking back the power of the purse and showing that our values, while we're fighting our policymakers to understand those values, but it's those concrete actions that allow us to stand up and say, you may spend my tax dollars that way, but I'm not going to spend my personal dollars that way. So.
Just wanted you all to know, actually a piece of legislation that we filed this year working with Jonathan that sort of speaks to your question. And what this is, it's House Bill 3363, filed by me and Rep. Denise Provo in Somerville. And it's called an act relative to revenue, information, and accountability. And what this would do if it were approved, and we're working with the legislature, is it would send a report to every Massachusetts resident about where their federal tax dollars go and how they're being spent. And so how much money do Massachusetts residents send to the federal government, and then how does the federal government spend that money in different categories, whether it's military, including nuclear weapons, and then all the different social programs. And so the hope, I think, would be, if we can get this done, it's a relatively low-cost endeavor, we could hopefully provide everyone with information so they know precisely what that accountability is for their revenue.
If my neighbors on Essex Street knew, well, you all know, you've heard about income tax, people bitch about income taxes, you read editorials every year your whole life, but you've never gotten from the federal government a report back on how your tax dollars were spent. Man, they hide that deep. And if you don't know about the National Priorities Project, it's very hard to get those numbers. I am sure that if my neighbors knew that half their income tax dollars were going to buy weapons, they would be outraged. If you ask them how much they think, they say, 5-10%. And then a lot of people think the Pentagon budget doesn't come from taxes. They think the Pentagon has their own money. So let me just call things to a close. First place, we understand that every single person in this room is a leader in some arena, enormously knowledgeable. We're gonna get back in touch with you gently, 3 or 4 weeks, put together a little listserv. Don't get scared, you'll be able to unsubscribe. And we're gonna call a couple of meetings. Don't worry if you don't get to them, right? And we'll launch a few focused efforts. Pick a few towns for resolutions, pick a few colleges, get a little committee of people that wants to support the individual thing. Find some folks who want to do the more broad effort, and just keep reading the emails, which will come not too often, until you find the little arena that fits you, right? The person who's going to write the materials that Jason's going to publish, which is very different than what we had sent to the Cambridge Chronicle. Peace Action's been around for 60 years. We don't have any foundation grants. We don't have any real angels. We run like a trade union runs, that people send in dues and keep us going. And we have a very, very, very long tradition of organizing from the bottom up against very, very, very difficult targets, and partly we're able to do it because we have all this talent. But the other reason we're able to do it is because we believe in you and not in the Beltway, right? And so things will happen, and just stay with us. And of course, we also listen. And when someone puts in, say, you're on the wrong boat, now we got to change the priority, dump that idea, do this. Everybody coming to any meeting of mass peace action attends with power. You can make a motion, you can propose a committee to relook at it, launch an initiative, et cetera, which is why people keep on coming back. So thank you so much for coming here and sitting. Thanks to our panel.